Hello, and welcome to today's special webinar event, Accelerate Security Analytics at Any Scale with Unified Fast File and Object Storage. Today's webinar is sponsored by Pure Storage and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, there are a few things you should know about this webinar. First off, we want this to be a very educational event for you. So we encourage any and all questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in detail some of the top questions that you ask. In the handout section of your webinar control panel, you will find that we're offering several resources. First off, you'll hear a lot about Pure Storage FlashBlade today. There's a link there for a test drive, so be sure to check that out. The resources also include a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Events Center, where you can find out about more fantastic events like this one. So I encourage you to download those handouts now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event. If you're watching this webinar on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. If you are the winner, you can choose to donate the value of that gift card to one of our selected charities. Thanks to generous prize winners on previous Actual Tech Media events, thousands of dollars have been donated to charity. So thank you in advance if you make that choice today. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found at actualtechmedia.com. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask questions. So to help encourage you to get your fingers off of your coffee cup and onto your keyboard, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. At the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's great content. So I'm excited to introduce you to our speaker today. It's Seth Kindley, who is a principal data architect at Pure Storage. And now I'm going to turn things over to Seth.
Speed security analytics at any scale with unified fast file and object storage. I am Seth Kindley, one of the principal data architects for Pure Storage, and we're going to talk through how to make your security analytics faster and better today. Okay, so what are we here to talk about? Security analytics, the data considerations therein. And one of the first things that comes to mind is the role of security analytics in the enterprise. It is not some stagnant thing that sits and doesn't change and can't be innovated against. It's something that we have to pay attention to pretty much all of the time. So the role of security analytics is to have real-time threat detection, then do threat analysis and advanced analysis above and beyond that. So persistent needs for security operations have to be taken in real time. Real-time threat detection, incident response, automation, and the reduction of what I've come to call alert fatigue, where you get more emails or SNMP traps or text messages than maybe you ever cared to have received about your infrastructure. What we need to do is take that and get intelligence from it, of the threat, of the reaction, and what we should do with it. And that takes us into this threat analysis phase, where you look at things like advanced threats or advanced persistent threats, which could come from an organized nation state and be perpetrated over time, where they're sort of perpetual, and we're attempting to garner information from systems that have been exploited or attempting to exploit systems by constantly working to take advantage of them. Anomaly detection, which could be systems, SPNs, services, API calls that become anomalous, or it could be users, people that all of a sudden are acting differently than they have in the past, where for the last 6 months, 8 hours a day, somebody has done a very routine sort of workflow that you can trend, and all of a sudden they're starting to browse and look into different pieces of the infrastructure that they don't have a business need to be in. And then finally, once again, intelligence. There's a theme here. How do we glean intelligence out of that threat information and take it and turn it into something that we can make work for us. Finally, we get into advanced analytics, where you can take all of the data that's gathered that sits in your SIEM, sits in your log stash, sits in a data lake, if you will, and run artificial intelligence or neural nets, machine learning against it. Basically take and build a data pipeline full of threat heuristics and then glean information out of it. What are we going to learn based on what we have? Can we emulate? Can we model and predict what's going to take place next? We do this through advanced algorithms on the platforms. You can make your own if you've got data scientists that are better at doing this. You can certainly bring your own to the platform to take this and make something from it. And then we've touched on it a little bit, but finally, UEBA, user entity behavior analytics. Is it a user? Is it an entity acting on behalf of a user? How do we make sure that those are normal, that nothing has changed? Sometimes change is good, sometimes change is bad. How do we know the difference between the two? And that's where, once again, the intelligence and the analytics will come in. All right, digital threats that are assessed by SIEM servers. You can have log analytics, and log analytics often need real-time and historical data to get you that comprehensive protection or that comprehensive lens where you actually know what's going on. So within this, we have a couple different types of threats, right? The traditional phishing, where, hey, an email comes in, it's too good to be true. It looks like it came from somebody on your team and they just want you to click on this Google Docs. Not to mention the fact that it came in at 2:30 in the morning on a Sunday, which you know very good and well your coworker is not emailing you then, or hopefully they're not. And you click on it because it looks like it should. Phishing is dangerous. It can lead to malware. It can lead to exploits. It can lead to you having to call IT and explain yourself, and nobody likes that. We touched on APTs, advanced persistent threats. Oftentimes those result in a denial of service, an exploitation of some sort, and they're a very protracted threat vector. It takes a long time. They're constantly working and iterating. So it's not something that goes away. It's not point in time. You're always going to have it, hence the name. And then finally, ransomware. Probably the thing that is at the heart of all the discussions around security, analytics, and how to protect the enterprise has unfortunately become ransomware, because it's a very lucrative business of malfeasance where you can go in and you can dwell, hopefully undetected, for a long amount of time before then executing the exploit and encrypting the most critical systems in an infrastructure. Every industry, every set of personnel has been targeted by ransomware. We've seen it in the news, from healthcare to energy to things in between, agriculture. And ransomware is terrifying, quite frankly. And it's also, like I said, it's lucrative. So unfortunately, lots of people are looking into ransomware. I mean, for goodness sake, you can buy pre-canned ransomware exploits on the dark web. And as long as you have an internet connection, you can put them out there to work, and then try and get, well, money out of it. And that's the biggest thing, is that unfortunately ransomware, not all the time, there's actually a very low sort of probability of catching people who exploit ransomware and who deploy it. So with that, until we get better at it, until the industry gets better at preempting and then catching folks, ransomware is something that is very prevalent. So be aware of it. All right, now capturing the data. We've talked about all the scary stuff. Now we're going to talk about how you capture the data. And I know this is a busy slide. It's got a packet dump in there. It looks like a whole bunch of information. And this is really just a tiny cross section of what you would actually look at. So if this looks like a lot, think about scaling this out into hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of endpoints, operations, and things that are taking place. And you can see where this data becomes unmanageable, something that a human cannot get through, no matter how much coffee and how many hours you spend working on it. So we know that it's a lot of data. But even though it's a lot of data, are you capturing all of the data? Are you capturing what's relevant? Those are the things that you have to ask yourself. Log and event data is spread out across every platform. Every piece of the enterprise has a log that gets shipped somewhere or has a log that is recorded. And all of that data quickly amounts to something that you have to have a platform to interpret. So we'll get logs from files, applications, telemetry data from sensors in the field, or from airlines, from ships, from anything that is going to generate data in this IoT world. It will all be sent somewhere. Not to mention virtual machine, your cloud, internal cloud, external cloud, hybrid cloud, something in between, network events, operating systems. You guys get the idea. There's more data than you can possibly parse or look at yourself or with a team of people. So with that, we have data requirements. How do your log analytics and your data platform address the requirements? Well, if you don't have real-time processing, it's something that you need to look into, because the longer you dwell looking at logs, or the longer you have to look into logs, the more things can take place. So real-time processing with consistent search and query performance, an SLA that you can take to the bank and say that I can search a terabyte of data in 4 minutes. I can get those results back to my researchers or to my IA or to my cyber team in a set time. If you can do that, you've got a leg up on the competition. But the platform also has to be able to rapidly ingest data. So it's only as good as the slowest piece of the puzzle. If you can't ingest the data at near real time from all of those endpoints that we talked about, the operating systems, the telemetry from sensors, the data, the users, the endpoint devices, et cetera, it doesn't do any good if it's queued up in the ether where you can't search it. And then finally, you have to have agile pipelining for data in motion. So agile development, agility, and elasticity in your ability to take data in, manipulate it, and then look into the next thing, which is the historical context. All of this data is great, but a snapshot of a point in time may not mean anything, or you may miss something that is critical without historical contents. So the data collection has to be scalable to have both the historical data as well as the new data. The storage needs to be efficient, meaning that you're not going to have care and feeding of the storage to allow it to do the missions that you're looking at. And the storage should be non-disruptive, both in the hardware and the software sense. So if you're running 24/7, 365, your storage should as well, from hardware and a software perspective. And what that platform would give you is the ability to scale out to maintain both your historical and your net new data for intelligence purposes, getting information out of the data in the system. And all of this needs to be managed simply. If the infrastructure is so wildly esoteric that you have to have a team of people to maintain the storage, well, that's not necessarily a good utilization of time. You should hire the people to take the data and get insights from it, not worry about the actual hardware. So effective capacity planning would be something that's important. I was going to say that intelligently driven capacity planning, where you're able to trend performance and utilization over time to give you a predictive run rate, is obviously something that's advantageous, especially as data influx grows. And you should have the ability to have easy installation and operation. So if you need to add a piece to the system, you should be able to do it real time. If you need to enable a feature within Pure, you don't have to enable things that are already there, but you should be able to add to this non-disruptively and scale your operation as your data scales. And then finally, the platform should be able to adapt to changing profiles. Now, that could be data sovereignty, that could be data governance, that could be data gravity or data locality, where you may need more in one location and less in another. If the platform has the ability to elastically expand and contract, that's just something that is beneficial for everybody involved. Now, we've got an overview. We know that there's a lot of data. We know that the threat landscape is varied and somewhat scary. So let's get into powering analytics with a data foundation. And what you'll see here is that powering analytics for security insights has the same three pillars that we talked about before: fast insights, efficient scalability, and reduced complexity. But what that comes to in practice is that fast insights are really a cofactor of high throughput and low latency of the storage subsystem so that you can get real-time data. And then consistent performance needs to be something that's quantifiable. So if it can burst, but it can't sustain, you may not be able to do real-time analytics all the time. You may have to batch your jobs, and batching jobs means that it runs on a schedule, and it's counterintuitive and not what you need in this real-time environment. Now, when we talk about efficiency of scale, we talked about elasticity in and out, but what we didn't talk about was the disaggregation of capacity, where you allow compute to do just that. Compute, take things in, process them, and then ship them out to a best of breed platform on the back end that scales independently of compute. This, of course, allows you to be a better steward of your budget. If you need compute, you buy compute. If you need storage, well, you buy storage. And it gives you the ability to separate those two from attack vectors. Storage can be hardened independently of compute. Storage can have different regulatory or statutory compliance applied to it. And of course, storage can have encryption applied at rest, which doesn't affect your compute, making the whole system more efficient. It also reduces silos and limits disruption. Storage can be modified, can be updated independently of compute. You know that operating system patches will not have the potential to not affect your storage. Anybody who's done a Patch Tuesday knows what that's all about. And then finally, like I said, non-disruptive operations and non-disruptive upgrades. If you can have your foundation being non-disruptive, then you can move things around in the IT infrastructure. You can do networking, compute, and storage independently of one another, with the idea being that you never take any piece of the puzzle out of the equation from doing work. And then finally, simple is smart. Let's reduce this complexity, right? Adapt with cloud-like agility. That means go in, make a run book, make a virtual service catalog where you can go in and check out resources or apply them. If you're containerizing, you can make those PVCs to the disaggregated storage from an automation layer in the software, greatly reducing the complexity of the overall environment. And that allows you to really focus on the insight, right? What are we getting out of all of this, as opposed to how am I setting this up to continue moving it? I don't want to just go ahead and stick another Band-Aid on it to try and keep it going. Now the infrastructure is solvent and stable. And what I can do is use that to get the information that I need. All right. So with all of that being said, what does it really amount to? Where does the rubber meet the road, so to speak? And the rubber meets the road at accelerating our time to insight and having this scalable performance. So you can see here, it's a bit of a small slide, but real world throughput. Here we see that a single flash blade from Pure Storage can do 15 gigabytes of NFS read in a 4RU device. Over S3, it will do 14.5 gigabytes. And then on write, we're going to do an even 4.5. So that read-write disparity is understood, but in a 4RU device, you're going to be able to write data in efficiently, mitigating that bottleneck we talked about real-time ingest. And then you're going to be able to read it back from those applications or from those consumers at nearly 3 times the speed to ensure that you get the information as quickly as possible. Now, high throughput, right? We just talked about what it can do. Now we see some scaling, because these systems will go from 15 blades to 150 blades in a single namespace in a single rack, right? So we're not talking about racks and racks of infrastructure with huge amounts of power and cooling. We're talking about 42 RU. So from 15 blades, you get 15 gigabytes of read. 75 blades, you get 75 gigabytes of read. Like I said, up to 150, which has been tested right now. So 150 linear scaling, you know, you can get about 150 gigabytes of read. And then finally, fast at scale. speed of historical research. That got smushed down a little bit too much because we're not in person and I don't have a giant whiteboard to show you all. But all that this is showing is that the performance increases linearly and does not drop off. So if you look at those graphs on the x-axis, this is not dropping off at any point, all the way up to the largest solution that we have. Now, optimization with disaggregated storage. We talked about disaggregated storage. Now we get to see what it really means. So on the left side of this slide, we have the legacy approach, where you have a compute infrastructure with some SSD or some NVMe DAS that is attached to it. And what that leads to is you have to rebalance the infrastructure. If you're short on storage and you don't have drive slots available on a server, or you've crested the amount of storage that the operating environment can meet or can support rather, you have to add another compute node with more drive slots. All that, well, not all, but one of the things that amounts to is silos, hot spotting, the need to move data around, rebalance, and manipulate hardware so that the applications can keep running. Now on the right side, what you can see is the disaggregated approach that we've been talking about. And this is the way to speed up your analytics and to speed up your security response time, where you can have a number of servers, 10, 12, 20, 50, right? It's up to you. But you can have the number of compute devices that your workflow is going to require outside of the storage. And all of those servers are going to point to the disaggregated storage model. They're going to be on an SMB share, an NFS mount, maybe an S3 bucket or object container. And what you'll be able to do is write simultaneously across all those access protocols into one platform that scales independently of compute. So disaggregated, we think at Pure, is sort of the ubiquitous platform moving forward. Okay, so summation, dramatically simplified management. Spend more time on your insights, not on the infrastructure. The last few slides that we talked about is really what we came to here, is that you are going to spend more time getting meaningful, actionable inferences out of the data that you've gathered, not spending the time on setting up the infrastructure and maintaining the infrastructure. So it's easy to manage. You can do it from your iPhone, your Android, your tablet. It can be done while you're at your kid's soccer game. No longer do you have to be at a console with a specific sort of access modality to modify and manage and look at these devices. Non-disruptive upgrades, we talked about that both in the hardware and the software sense. No compromise on the software policy, it's all included. So encryption, compression, deduplication, it's all there. Snapshots, replication, if you name it, it's included. And then self-tuning intelligence. So load balancing, fault tolerance, IO optimization based on what is being written into or read out of the system will be automated automatically. Excuse me, that's hard to say, but it will be tuned within parameters that are defined based on what we see coming in. So all that means is a few fewer nerd knobs to tune and things to worry about. And then simple setup and fast setup. You can set this up, a finite number of cables, a finite number of mouse clicks in short order to get your insights up and running, get the platform ready to have a new workflow on it very quickly. And all of this can be actually consumed as a service, where if CapEx is not something that is going to meet the mail, you can run this as a service. It is not a lease. You maintain ownership of the gear. You can P-tag it appropriately or put it into your inventory, but it will run as a service, which allows you the ability to really take that elasticity to the next level. You may ask yourself, this is all great, but I want to talk about cloud. Everything is going to cloud. Well, can you do cloud? Absolutely, we can do cloud. So you can see here, this is one technology stack. Everything that we've talked about within FlashBlade can be run on-prem, hybrid, or in adjacent to a cloud. So the unified fast file and object solution, we've got disaggregated compute, we've got fast object storage, and then we've got an S3 endpoint on the other side. So as long as it will speak S3, that could be AWS, Azure, GCP, You can take your on-prem and you can port it into a cloud. Okay, quick break. There aren't any interactive questions, but now we're going to talk about deploying security analytic applications within Pure. So the first one and the most prevalent is log analytics. Log analytics could mean multiple things. I've got all of these disparate logs. They may go into a data lake, a data warehouse. They may be forwarded to SIEM. They may just exist in islands. And what we're taking away is the legacy approach that we've talked about, where you've got the log from the server, you've got 5 servers in a cluster. Those 5 servers in a cluster are acting differently than one another. And we don't want to have 5 points for looking up logs. Well, with FlashBlade, you could take all of those logs and you could forward them to the FlashBlade. You could do this via your SIEM or your log analytics platform of choice. And what we're going to get into is Splunk, because we see it, likely most of you may have it in your enterprise. And if you don't have Splunk, we'll get into some of the other options here in a minute. But you can bring more data to do more decisions faster. We talked about enterprise security, UBA, UEBA, and the like within Splunk. But what you'll see here is that you have files, network events, applications, operating system, telemetry from sensors. And what you're going to get with Pure is the fast storage for your historical, so your cold, your archived here, your cold bucket, as well as your warm bucket and your hot bucket. You're going to have hot and warm and cold all on the same hardware device because Pure doesn't have to do tiering. So it's cold by name alone. And what you'll get out of that is an SLA for your cold that looks similar to your hot, meaning that you can search your entire data set with the same SLA without having to wait for the data to be recalled from the archive tier. Let's face it, random reads are slow off of archive. But if your archive happens to be on all flash, well, then your archive is not slow. And the nice thing about this is obviously you can take and apply it to cybersecurity, information assurance, IT operations, network analytics, and application performance. Now, if you weren't doing classic Splunk with hot, warm, cold, and you're looking into Smart Store, which is disaggregated object storage and warm perpetually, you can see that it's effectively the same architecture. The piece of hardware just changes behind the scenes. So FlashBlade will be placed into the Splunk environment as the perpetual warm with a guaranteed SLA. And it applies to everything that we've seen before, right? So there's going to be an index or cache, and then there's going to be FlashBlade. And you can still put the same data types and sets into that environment and run through it just like you would anywhere else. Now, if Splunk isn't your thing, we also work with Elastic. Of course, we work with Vertica as well, but that's not covered here. Vertica both in Vertica in Eon mode. But with Elastic, you can see that it's slightly differentiated, right? The DAS architecture on the left side in the middle column, left side of that. Sorry, that was a bit confusing. You'll see that there's typically Elastic with HDFS. There's new cluster servers. There's Spark on top of it. And everything is somewhat complex and convoluted. It's not quite as straightforward as on the right side where you see the Elastic nodes, the Spark nodes, the compute, everything in between, all talking to this disaggregated approach. So what does this mean? Simplicity, scale, and speed. Find out people or operations, services, anything that is acting anomalously, figure out what it's doing, why it's doing, and how to remediate it. Now, we've gone through kind of a lot in a short time. Thank you for sticking with us so far. There will be Q&A after this, but we wanted to jump into a couple customer stories, right? It's great to hear from the vendor, of course. The OEM is very proud of what they do, but here are some stories from end users. And this one comes from Virginia Tech, the Hume Center for National Security and Technology. And you can see some of the quotes here. But the biggest thing is the fact that Dr. William Clark says you need to have as much information as you can possibly collect, terabytes of information. So figuring out that data structure how to store it, and how to get it on disk efficiently, although it should be SSD, but that's okay. Disk efficiently and back off disk efficiently is a significant challenge. And that was the challenge that they were faced with. And what Pure did was give them the answer to that equation. How do you get it on effectively? How does it encompass the entire data set? And then how do you get it off and glean information, get what you need out of it? And that's what Pure brought to Virginia Tech. And then finally, we'll go ahead and jump into Frost. So banking, investment, and insurance. Splunk on Pure Storage return answers in seconds. It's very fast. Tony Garza said that. And what we saw there for them was several powers, not necessarily orders, but powers better performance, where it allowed them to do more with their storage infrastructure. And we have these linked out there so that you can go out and see them for yourselves. But basically, we've got a few folks that talk about really taking this from whiteboard to keyboard, putting it in practice and seeing what they can get from it. I know we've gone through, like I said, quite a bit in short order, and I just want to go ahead and put this out there for where you guys can learn more. Out on purestorage.com, if you look for test drive, you can kick the tires on this yourself, so you can go through and see what it does, what it is going to bring to the table on day 0. And then if you search unified fast file and object storage, you'll see more about what we talked about here, which is FlashBlade, the NFS, SMB, and S3 platform. And then finally, if you look for a data storage foundation for security analytics, you'll see the deeper dive of what we've just scratched the surface on here today. Once again, that's at purestorage.com. The search keys are out there and they're under the analytics and platform resources. Thank you all for your time. We're going to switch it over to the Q&A at this point. Please feel free to raise your hand and let us know. Thank you all.
All right, fantastic. That was really interesting, Seth. And so we're going to open it up for questions, as Seth said. Seth, are you ready for some questions?
Hey, Scott, can you hear me now?
I can. Excellent. Thanks, Seth. So, the first thing that I wanted to ask you about is with security analytics, how many people are doing that today?
It's become almost ubiquitous where everybody is doing it, some more than others, but in earnest, every enterprise we've spoken to is beginning to look at their secure logs and logs in general, not as where data goes to die, but as something can actually get meaningful inferences from to model or emulate either attacks or their responses to things. So last, I would say 18 months, it did seem to coincide with everybody being home and having more time at the board, but it is becoming something that we speak about multiple times a week.
We're talking about a lot of data, and I know the tools are growing fast as far as I know that the tools are generating a ton of security data, like SIEM tools and others. And I'm just curious, how large does an organization need to be to get value out of doing log analytics with FlashBlade?
You don't need to be very large at all. It could be data sets in several hundred gigabytes of really important data, or it could be anybody that delves into having to adhere to compliance, whether it be SOC, SOC Type 2, PCI, DPR if you're international. Pretty much any enterprise can take advantage of doing security analytics and proving that they are ahead of the curve, no matter the size, whether it's 5 people or whether it's 5,000 people. Every enterprise has a use case with security analytics.
Gotcha. How common is it for organizations not to use analytics because of the storage issues?
So it may be identified as a storage issue, but analytics oftentimes overlooked because the implied sort of complexity. It's something that is intimidating, and if you've never done it, or if you don't have rails to help keep you moving forward. So storage infrastructure becomes conversation after it's typically been tried with results that are less than were desirable. So it really just depends. I would say mostly, Scott, it's just the unknown. This is a relatively new discipline that, unless you've been doing information assurance or cyber, it's something that's normal for IT, right? Things are logged. We can go and search the log if and when there's an issue, but being reactive is not really efficient anymore. It's not enough to be active. You have to be proactive, and that's been the inflection point is getting proactive about this, and then seeing the infrastructure, the automation, tooling, and being at efficiency. That's really been the shift.
Okay, great. We've got a question from Vishali who's wondering, what kind of management tools do you offer?
Yeah, so management can be done a couple different ways. If this hardware is ready to phoning home into a secure data center, we have something called the Pure One Management Cloud, which telemetry is phoned home. It's visualized through Prometheus and Fauna, so that you get a dashboard that shows the events. It shows you your predictive fill, your utilization, and it actually is monitored and sort of analyzed against what Pure calls fingerprints, where we see a number of sort of permissional combinatorics between gear and operating environments and what people are doing with it. And if we identify a fingerprint that can add to increased latency, we'll send you an email proactively saying that your version of Scientific Linux, for instance, is on a kernel that has a PF that you need to patch, otherwise it might slow down your storage. And if you can't phone home, if you're in a regulated industry, then you can have API calls to API endpoints that will dump it out. You have a CLI, and then you have GUI management. And the GUI management would be multiple devices, one flash, 10 flash blades, doesn't matter. All that sits in one pane of glass where you can look at it, make modifications across the fleet, and visual what's going on within it.
I got a question from Larissa who's wondering, when it comes to internal audits, how does the tool perform when pulling security data?
So it performs admirably, depending on what you're doing with your internal audit. If you're using something like Nessus or Tripwire to look at the system itself, you can pull the configuration data. And then subsequently, Pure has a set of online resources available to you to look at CVEs that have been mediated in the code set, and to have tenable result you can differentiate. Now, if you're pulling data out of it, all of those logs are stored on the device itself, or can be forwarded to your server of choice, syslog, SIEM, have you, and that just becomes an end that you search from your platform.
Gotcha. But Seth, I guess just the last question before we wrap up. If people want to get started with FlashBlade and with log analytics, utilizing FlashBlade, what's their best bet?
So you can certainly go out to the handout section and get the virtual tool of the FlashBlade to kick the tires. When you register for that, we'll get your information to get somebody in touch with you. Pure has account teams that support every vertical the globe. So once you register for it, you need to put a real valid email address in there so you can download it, and so they can help you through the process. Of course, if you're not there yet, go ahead and go out to YouTube or purestorage.com. Just put in your storage security analytics, and you'll get a nice cross section of videos, white papers, documentation. That if that piques your interest, then back to that test drive, request it. You'll get in touch with some Puritans. We don't have funny shoes or bucket hats, but Puritans will get in touch with you and help you navigate the analytics.
All right, great. Well, Seth, thanks a lot for an excellent presentation and being here. Really, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Thank you, everyone.
And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Amazon gift card, the prize drawing, and the winner of the gift card is Vijayan Nair from Texas. So Vijayan, congratulations. We'll be in touch with you to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Seth for putting together a really informative presentation and for his insights on the Q&A. I'd also like to thank Pure Storage for making this event possible. And last but not least, I'd like to thank you all for attending and for your questions. So that concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.